Welcome to The Explainer. We are standing at a genuinely critical junction in global climate action right now. The latest warnings from UN climate scientists? Well, they serve as a stark reminder that we urgently need to scale our solutions, and fast. The reality is totally undeniable. And to secure any kind of sustainable future, we have to look really closely at the literal building blocks of our world.
37%. Just let that number sink in for a second. It's a massive figure, and it represents a massive challenge for us. A staggering 37% of global energy-related carbon emissions come directly from the building and construction sector. And the hard truth, we're collectively just not moving at a pace fast enough to curb this impact.
Now, when we talk about the built environment footprint, I know it can kind of sound like abstract industry jargon, but this sprawling cityscape you're thinking of, it isn't just concrete and steel. This is your daily life. We're talking about the very homes you sleep in, the offices you commute to, the schools your kids attend, and the hospitals you visit. They are the driving forces behind these all-time high emissions. We aren't just talking about smokestacks and factories anymore. We are talking about the basic infrastructure of human existence.
Which brings us to a rather direct, maybe even a little uncomfortable question. Is the very roof over your head driving the climate crisis? Because right now, emissions from the sector's energy use have actually exceeded pre-pandemic levels. There is a clock ticking, and it's ticking loudly. Any emission reductions we've managed to scrape together from efficiency improvements are literally being outpaced by the sheer massive volume of global construction. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's how we're going to break down the World Green Building Council's roadmap for decarbonizing our world over the next few minutes. We'll start with the 37% problem. Define the net zero solution, explore global network, local action, check out breakthroughs at COP, and finally, look at achieving critical mass.
Section 1. The 37% problem. Intent versus reality.
So, on the side of intent, 80% of countries now actually refer to buildings in their national climate action plans. Sounds great, right? Lots of paperwork, lots of gold stars. But on the reality side, only 26% actually have mandatory codes for their entire building sector. You see, we have this massive gap between promising to diet and actually eating our vegetables. And this gap means action simply isn't happening at the scale or the speed we absolutely need to have emissions by our fast-approaching 2030 deadline.
Moving on to Section 2. The net zero solution. Defining the mission. So, to address this reality gap, the WorldGBC network is driving a global program called Advancing Net Zero. The core mission here is total sector decarbonization by 2050, but with a major focus on something called whole life carbon. What does that mean? It means looking at the carbon cost of a building from the exact moment materials are mined, all the way through construction, daily operation, and its eventual demolition. And here's the incredibly optimistic part. According to the IPCC, demand-side measures can actually reduce emissions in this sector by up to 66% by 2050. The best part is we already have the solutions today. By integrating brilliant nature-based designs, like sprawling green roofs and natural ventilation, right alongside decarbonized heating technologies, we can drastically cut those emissions. We don't need to sit around waiting for some science fiction miracle tech to be invented. The blueprint is already here. Section 3. Global Network. Local Action. Voices from the regions.
Let's start over in the Americas. What's amazing is we aren't just seeing broad, sweeping PR statements here. We're seeing highly granular, city-level blueprints truly taking root. Through initiatives like the Zero Carbon Building Accelerator, places like Bogotá, Cali, and several municipalities in Costa Rica are drawing up very real, actionable roadmaps. Pamela Castellan, the chair of the Americas Regional Network, captures this ground-level momentum perfectly. She notes that the commitment and leadership of the business sector in Latin America to move towards carbon neutrality is reflected in the signing of WorldGBC's Net Zero Carbon Buildings commitment. It shows the corporate world is actually stepping up and actively aligning with localized human action.
Sweeping across the Atlantic, Europe is pushing this massive #BuildingLife campaign, rallying nearly 200 industry ambassadors to drive a whole-life carbon roadmap. Meanwhile, the Middle East and North Africa region is doing something uniquely beautiful. Their net zero framework is heavily focused on youth and human-centered education. They're basically shifting the conversation from pure, dry technical specs to empathy, education, and inclusivity.
Transitioning over to Africa, we find a region that is the absolute linchpin for sustainable future investments. Why? Because Africa is staring down some serious exponential urban growth. Over the next few decades, the sheer volume of infrastructure needed is staggering. So the building decisions made in Africa today will quite literally echo for generations.
As Elizabeth Wanjache Chige points out, to overcome the obstacles ahead of us, we must collaborate towards a sustainable, inclusive Africa. And to make that happen, they've launched the Africa Manifesto, and really importantly, the African Alliance, which critically connects micro, small, and medium enterprises across the continent to share knowledge and make sure absolutely no one is left behind in this green transition.
Section 4. Breakthroughs at COP, the climate milestones.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is looking at the immense pressure we are operating under. We moved from COP27 in Egypt in 2022 right into the high stakes of COP28 in Dubai, which served as the world's very first global stocktick, basically a giant global audit of our climate progress. These aren't just elite networking events, you guys. They are ultimate ticking clock checkpoints to have our emissions by 2030 before we have to hit total decarbonization by 2050.
And make no mistake, real work is happening at these summits. Just at COP27 alone, the Africa COP, the building sector showed up in absolute force. There were over 200 built environment events, and an incredible 19 new sector initiatives were officially launched. The industry is loudly declaring that they have the solutions and they are ready to scale them.
Finally, Section 5, Achieving Critical Mass, Turning Pledges into Action.
So what's the final piece of the puzzle? It's taking these proven frameworks and scaling them rapidly. Here are the practical steps needed right now. First, we must immediately utilize available technologies to reduce embodied carbon. That's all the CO2 emitted just from manufacturing and transporting things like steel and cement before the building is even used. We can actually have those construction emissions today with tools already in our hands. Second, companies need to implement science-based targets aligned with a 1.5-degree future. And third, governments absolutely must step up and enforce mandatory building codes. Empty pledges just aren't going to cut it anymore.
Because this right here is the ultimate goal we are working toward. A zero-emission, efficient, and resilient built environment is not just some corporate talking point. It represents much healthier living conditions, massive energy savings, and a stabilized climate. It is a vital and completely achievable reality for our cities.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Next time you step outside, really look at the buildings around you. As that 2030 deadline races toward us, how will your community adapt to the net zero future? It's a massive transition, and it requires every single one of us, from city planners to daily commuters, to demand and support a sustainable built environment. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the tough questions about the world we are building.